Somatic experiencing for relational trauma starts where talk therapy hits its limit. If you've done the work, years of talk therapy, journaling, naming every pattern, every trigger, every childhood wound with textbook precision, and still, your body reacts before your mind ever gets a vote. Your shoulders lock the second someone raises their voice. Your chest tightens when someone gets too close, too fast. You understand exactly why, and it changes nothing. That gap between what you know and what your body still does is where somatic experiencing for relational trauma begins. Talk therapy treats the mind like it's running the show, but trauma doesn't live primarily in the part of you that thinks. It lives in the part of you that reacted in real time to protect you and never got the message that the danger passed. That's not a metaphor. It's a physiological fact that changed how an entire field understands healing, and it's why so many people can pass every insight-based test their therapist gives them and still feel exactly the same in their body. Somatic experiencing was developed by Peter Levine, whose book Waking the Tiger introduced these concepts to the world after he noticed something strange watching animals in the wild. A gazelle escapes a predator, and minutes later, its body visibly shakes. Then it goes back to grazing like nothing happened. Humans don't do that. We survive the threat and then spend years carrying it because our thinking brain overrides the discharge our body was built to complete. Levine's work centers specifically on the freeze response, the survival state where the body locks instead of fights or flees, and how that incomplete response becomes stored in the autonomic nervous system. Somatic experiencing for relational trauma is built on that missing step, giving the body the chance to finish what it started. This work also sits in close conversation with Stephen Porges's Polyvagal theory, which maps how the vagus nerve governs our nervous system's sense of safety. Where Levine tracks the body's incomplete survival responses, Porges describes the underlying architecture, how our autonomic nervous system is constantly scanning the environment through a process he calls interoception, detecting threat or safety below the level of conscious thought, long before any conscious decision gets made. Together, these two frameworks form the scientific backbone of why somatic experiencing for relational trauma works the way it does. Here's what makes relational trauma specifically different from a single dangerous event. It doesn't come from one clear moment. It comes from years of a nervous system calibrating itself around another person, someone who was supposed to be safe and wasn't consistently. What attachment theory, originally developed by John Bowlby, describes as a disrupted secure base becomes, over time, a body-level survival strategy. That kind of trauma gets stored not as a memory you can narrate, but as a default setting, hypervigilance in closeness, bracing before affection. A body that treats love itself as a variable to be monitored rather than a place to rest. Clinicians now recognize this pattern as complex PTSD, a term that captures the cumulative relational nature of the wound in a way that single-incident trauma frameworks simply don't. This is why understanding your story often isn't enough. You can know exactly why you flinch and still flinch. The nervous system doesn't update through insight. It updates through experience, specifically through experiencing safety in the body while the old activation is present, which is the entire mechanism somatic experiencing for relational trauma is designed to create. The first piece of that mechanism is called titration. Instead of diving into the worst memory and reliving it in full, which often just re-traumatizes the nervous system, you approach it in small, tolerable doses, staying close enough to the edge of activation without falling into it. It's slow by design. The body doesn't heal faster because you push it harder, and rushing this process is usually what causes people to abandon it before it has a chance to work. The second piece is tracking sensation instead of story. Where do you feel it? Tight throat, hollow stomach, heat in your chest. This process, called interoception, treats these physical signals as data, not distraction, because the body was keeping score long before language existed to describe what happened. The third piece is completing the response that never finished. If your body wanted to run or push away or fight back and couldn't because the danger was a person you depended on, that impulse doesn't disappear. It waits. The freeze response, Levine's central research focus, is specifically this: a survival energy that locked in place and was never discharged. In session, that unfinished movement gets small, safe permission to complete, sometimes as literally as a slow push against resistance or trembling that's allowed to happen instead of suppressed. The fourth piece is pendulation, deliberately moving attention between activation and safety. A moment of tension, then a moment of noticing something steady, your feet on the floor, your breath, a hand on your own chest. Back and forth, what Dan Siegel calls working within the window of tolerance, until the nervous system learns it can visit distress and return rather than getting stuck there the way it used to. What this produces over time isn't the absence of triggers. It's a body that responds and then actually settles, instead of staying braced indefinitely. People describe it less as forgetting what happened, and more as finally being able to put it down, less like erasing a wound, and more like finally letting it close. Consider what this looks like for someone who freezes every time a partner raises their voice, even gently, even about something small. Talk therapy might help her understand that her father's temper trained that response decades ago. Somatic experiencing for relational trauma helps her body learn, through direct felt experience, that this room, this partner, this moment is not that house. The insight was already there. What was missing was proof her nervous system could actually register it, what Porges would call a genuine neuroceptive shift, safety detected, not just understood. This isn't a framework for diagnosing yourself from a video. It's not a replacement for a trained practitioner, and it isn't something to attempt alone if you're dealing with significant trauma history. What it is a different starting question. Not what happened to you, and not even why you react the way you do, but where you feel it right now, in your body, and what happens if you stay with that sensation just a little longer than usual. Most healing approaches ask you to think your way to safety. This one asks you to feel your way there instead. One completed response, one moment of pendulation, one settled breath at a time. Your body has been keeping a record this whole time. Somatic experiencing for relational trauma is simply the first approach that finally asks it what it's been trying to say.